Well, the federal election campaign has entered the home stretch. Millions have already voted, and in 1 week, we'll know who Canadians have chosen as their next government. Today, leaders look to sway undecided voters on day 30 of this campaign. The Liberals focus on health care, the Conservatives on housing, and the NDP on expanding pharmacare. There's lots to discuss with the Power Panel. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Cheryl Oates was Director of Communications for former Alberta New Democrat Premier Rachel Notley. And here with me in the studio, Jonathan Kalis, a former Quebec advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Happy Monday, gang, and happy day 30. Thanks for being here with a week to go.
One more week.
All right, we're going to get all of their thoughts, but first we're going to check in on the state of the race with just 1 week to go until Election Day. And that means it's time for the RIT.ca's Éric Grenier. He joins us now as he does every Monday. Éric, of course, runs the CBC's poll tracker. So, Éric, a lot of polling since the debates. Last week, the Liberals were holding about a 6-point lead over the Conservatives nationally. We've had the debates. Where do they all stand now?
We're seeing that there's a little bit of tightening in the polls, but that the Liberal lead is still holding pretty firm. So if we look at where the polls are right now in the poll tracker, which puts together all the polls that are being published throughout this campaign, the Liberals are still leading in our averages with 43.2% support. The Conservatives are in second with 38%. So again, we got a 5-point gap between the two parties, which has been a little bit smaller than where it was not too long ago, but still pretty good for the Liberals. And we got the NDP right now at 8.3%, the Bloc Québécois at 6%, and the Greens are at 2% support across the country.
Okay, you know, a few months ago, 43%, the Liberals would have been lucky to get 43 seats. You say it's a 5-point lead. The Liberals have a big advantage usually in vote efficiency. So those numbers, how do they translate into seat standings using your modeling?
Yeah, well, because we'll get into the regional numbers and it'll
Yeah.
explain why the numbers are as big as they are. But for the Liberals right now, projecting that they would win 194 seats with a range of between 176 to 214, need 172 for majority government, so they're over that threshold. Conservatives are at 122 seats right now in the projection. Bloc Québécois is at 21, the NDP is at 5 with a range of 0 to 10, and the Greens are at 1 with the range of 0 to 2 seats. So majority territory right now for the Liberals.
Okay, we're going to go through those battlegrounds, as Éric said. We got the handy map. This is the way it's going to start on election night. We're going to go back to 2023. This is the vote from the last time people voted, overlaid on the new map. So you're going to see some anomalies, like a Liberal in Saskatchewan. That's last election's vote on the new boundaries for this election because things have changed. But let's look at the battlegrounds. So Atlantic Canada, this has been mostly red, 32 seats, 24 to 8, Liberal to Conservative. The Liberals were way underwater there. Now they've rebounded. What's the current state of play in the East Coast?
Yeah, right now in the East Coast and Atlantic Canada, the Liberals do have a pretty big lead, and we can look at where the numbers are right now in the region. The Liberals have 53% support across Atlantic Canada. The Conservatives right now are at a little over 34%. The NDP at 8, and the Greens are at 2. So pretty big lead for the Liberals in Atlantic Canada, and we've really seen that hold throughout the whole campaign. Since the beginning, they've been ahead.
Okay, all right. So that looks like it's stable. We'll look at Quebec. This blue is the Bloc Québécois, by the way. The Conservative blue on this map is this much darker one here. The Liberals, their stronghold, of course, Éric, is the island of Montreal. The battle here is in the suburbs and the north and south shore. Post the debate, maybe some movement for Mr. Blanchet? What are we seeing in Quebec?
Yeah, it does seem like there might be a little bit of positive movement for the Bloc in Quebec. If we look at where those numbers are in the province, the Liberals still lead. They got 41%. We did see it earlier on in the campaign. They were higher than that, so they've come down a little bit from where they were at their high point. The Bloc Québécois is in second. The last time we chatted, I think the Bloc was in third place, but they're in second right now with 25%. Conservatives still holding pretty good at 23%, which is a lot more than they had in the last election, and the NDP very far back in 6%. So something to watch. We have seen a number of polls suggesting maybe the Bloc is coming up, and once they get a little bit higher than that, you can see a lot of seats in Quebec start to flip from Bloc or from Liberal over back to the Bloc.
Yeah, you get 5-6 percentage points, and suddenly double-digit seats start to move, right? Okay, Ontario, this is the ball game for this election, right? The key battleground down around the GTA, that's central and southern Ontario and southwestern Ontario. The Conservatives have to storm the suburbs around Toronto if they're going to form government. What does the numbers look like here in Ontario?
We're not really seeing any movement in Ontario, and that is probably the reason why the Liberals are so favored in the seat projection. If we look at where things are in Ontario, 49% support for the Liberals in the province. We've seen a number of polls out today showing double-digit leads for the Liberals in Ontario, 38% for the Conservatives, 8.5% for the NDP. And sometimes we're getting some GTA numbers. They're not very good for the Conservatives, at least not enough to have hopes of flipping a lot of seats. So if anything's going to change for the Conservatives, it has to happen in Ontario, but we haven't seen it happen yet.
Right, so the York region will be competitive, but the Bramptons, the Mississauga, Peel, that's where there's some challenges. All right, let's go to the prairies. So like Saskatchewan and Manitoba tend to get lumped together in a lot of the polling. This, as I say, is a vote from the 2021 election with the new boundaries here. There is no Liberal seat in Saskatchewan. But the numbers suggest there could be. Eric, walk us through Manitoba and Saskatchewan.
Yeah, there could be. So yeah, the pollsters combine the two provinces just because they're too small to each have their own sample in most of the national polling. The Conservatives have a lead in Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba, 49%. The Liberals are at 35%, are actually doing quite well. They might be in a neck-and-neck race with the Conservatives in Manitoba. Conservatives doing better in Saskatchewan. The NDP is at 10.5%. But yeah, we've seen some polling suggesting that the Liberals could be competitive in Saskatoon and Regina. I mean, it's the kind of thing I'll have to see to believe, but with the kind of numbers we've seen, it is possible the Liberals could pick up a handful of seats in Saskatchewan.
Right, and Carla Beck and the NDP did very well in the major cities in the provincial election there. Okay, let's have a look at Alberta. It is going to be a very blue map, you know, where we might see some red and some orange. We're going to go into the cities. Calgary, of course, is a place where the Liberals hold one seat, hope to gain some more, and then, of course, there's Edmonton, where all three parties are potentially in play there. Well, what's your sense of where things stand here in Alberta right now?
We could see some movement in Alberta because of what's happened in the polls. If we look at where things are, the Conservatives have a big lead in Alberta. No shock there. They're at 59% support in the province in the polls. The Liberals are at 29%, which would be better than what Justin Trudeau did in 2015 when they won 4 seats in the province. So that's why it could be possible that we could see a couple more seats go to the Liberals in Edmonton and Calgary. The NDP at 8.5%, they're just going to be trying to hope to hold the 2 seats that they won last time. One of them seems pretty safe, Edmonton-Strathcona. Edmonton-Griesbach could be a bit of a challenge.
Okay, look, there's 3 seats in the north. I don't think there's any data drilling down specifically on those. So British Columbia is the last thing we're going to talk about. A lot of this orange is in trouble, I think it's safe to say, Eric, and then we get into the lower mainland. We've got a little bit of green there on the island. A lot of 3-way splits potentially here, depending on which side of the Fraser River you're on. How does British Columbia look right now in the data that we have?
BC is probably the biggest puzzle when it comes to the polls. If we look at where things are right now, Liberals actually have a lead in British Columbia, and it's been holding pretty steady now for the last few weeks at 43%. The Conservatives have at 39.5% support in BC. The NDP is down to 13%. They had 29% last time. So that means they have less than half of the vote. The question is how much of it is going to be holding firm in the places where they have seats, how much is it going to collapse outside of those ridings? But with these kinds of numbers, Liberals could make a lot of gains in the Lower Mainland, on Vancouver Island. It's just a question of how many New Democrats are going to be able to survive.
Okay, I'm wiping it back to this because the only poll that matters is Election Day.
I've heard that.
As people like to say. But basically, the way all of these regional numbers break down, there needs to be significant movement, probably in Ontario and Quebec, for the Liberals to fall out of first place with a week left to go.
I think that Quebec and maybe British Columbia would be, if we're talking about the minority government, majority government, but for the Conservatives, they're going to have a shot to win. Those numbers I showed in Ontario, that's the end of the campaign for the Conservatives. They cannot win if they're down double digits in Ontario, and we haven't seen any movement. There has been that tightening we've seen in the polls, a little bit of it nationally, but it hasn't taken place in Ontario, and if it continues to hold firm for the Liberals, then they're going to cruise to a win, and probably a majority if they can hold those kinds of numbers.
Right, so not just tightening in Ontario, they got to move into first, the Conservatives.
They got to move big time.
Okay, all right, Eric, thank you, big time. That's Éric Grenier with the writ.ca. Okay, we're going to talk about all of this with the Power Panel. We're going to dig into those numbers. We've got Cheryl Oates, Lisa Raitt, Rob Rousseau, and Jonathan Kalis. So, Jono, with a week to go, a Liberal who was facing extinction a few months ago, how are you feeling right now? What's your sense of the state of this race?
Well, I mean, definitely much better than I was feeling, I don't know, 6 weeks ago or 6 months ago. But I think that there's a lot of work to do. 6 days left, 7 days left of the campaigning. It's get out the vote. It's staying on message. It's not making mistakes. This is a close race, and so not making a mistake, any mistake can change how this works out. I am most focused in terms of looking at polls, where the NDP numbers go in the rest of the country and where the Bloc numbers go in Quebec. So we've seen we've seen a bunch of polls today. I'm waiting for a Léger poll in Quebec to tell me what the Bloc is doing in Quebec because, you know, as Eric said, if the Bloc goes up 2-3 points,
moves mountains.
That could be 10, 12 ridings in Quebec that switch back from the way it's shading now to the Bloc. And whether it's majority or minority, or really whether, you know, the Conservatives are able to tighten the lead in Ontario, then those seats start to make a difference. I think the NDP again in Vancouver and on Vancouver Island. Right. That's where you're going to see them focusing, I would assume, in the last week of the campaign.
Lisa, what's your sense of the way Éric kind of laid it out and what seems like a pretty narrowing path to victory for Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives with a week to go? How do you see their chances to bust through here?
So, the weirdest thing about this, David, is the fact that the numbers, like 39% for Conservatives, is a great number,
I know.
Quite frankly.
Yeah.
And when I said before to you, I'm door knocking, so I was lucky enough to get some insight both in Cape Breton and here in my riding in Milton as to what's going on the ground. And in Toronto, too, I've been in there with Karen Stintz. And quite frankly, it doesn't feel terrible. So I don't know quite what to think about it. And it's not about denying what the pollsters are saying. I'm just saying that it's really strange for us to see such support at the doors. It's not the outright rejection of a Conservative coming to your door. There's an openness, there's a willingness to hear, they're interested, they like parts of it, they agree with us on the 10 years of the Liberal government. Whether or not we can convert that on election day to get it into a vote for us is going to be the question. And really, it's going to be in the hands of the voters. So I'm not disagreeing with anything that I'm seeing in the polls. I'm just saying it feels different at the doors, and perhaps maybe there's a chance. I'm always hopeful, and I'm also a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. So there you go.
Yeah, well, but on that, Lisa, I mean, 39% is where you guys were in 2011 when you won a majority government. So you can have both high levels of solid, motivated support, and the Liberals could still win because they just have a higher level of support. It's a very strange binary election turning out here.
Well, and it's because the NDP collapse is what it's coming down to. And that's the story of this election. It's the Progressives coalescing. But I saw something interesting, I thought. Correct me if I'm wrong, David. I may have misheard it. But I thought I heard something along the lines that Yves-François Blanchet announced on Tout le monde en parle that Mr. Carney was going to win. Yes. And I thought that was an interesting thing for him to do, because he's saying to Quebecers, look, he's got it bagged. Don't worry about it. You should really vote for me to make sure we get a few more Bloc voices in the House. And I thought that was very, very cagey the way he did it.
Yeah, the Yves-François Blanchet decision desk is projecting a Liberal government.
Sing's done something similar.
Sing has done something similar. Cheryl, what do you make of these moves? Because it has increasingly become the two frontrunners competing for the Prime Minister's office, and then the Bloc and the NDP, campaigning to hold some sort of balance or presence in what they hope would be yet another minority parliament. How do you see it based on what Éric walked us through right now?
Yeah, and I think what we just talked about in terms of the Bloc's positioning to say, don't worry about the overall picture. Here's our strategic argument about why you should vote for us. That is where the NDP has moved throughout this campaign as well. I mean, we saw no one wants to kick off an election campaign and not say, I'm running to be your prime minister. So, of course, that's how the NDP started. But as the campaign has evolved, we have seen this subtle shift from the NDP in terms of its messaging, in terms of Jagmeet Singh's offer, to not say, elect me to take on Donald Trump for you, but to remind people why they voted for New Democrats in the first place. And they're doing that in a much more targeted way in these last few days. So you see, Jagmeet out in Victoria, which has been historically an NDP safe seat, but doesn't look quite as safe this election. He's turned up to hundreds of people out to support him, out to rally for him. And so I think that's what you'll continue to see the NDP do over the course of this last week, is really target those incumbent ridings to make sure that people turn out, use their incredible ground game, and outperform what the national trends are currently predicting.
Yeah. Rob, to be fair, Yves-François Blanchet did start this campaign saying he didn't want to be prime minister. But he is a rarity. He is a rarity in that one. What do you make of where things are?
I'm reminded of what Stephen Harper used to say 15 years ago, maybe further back, that about 2/3 of the country wakes up every day thinking, how are they going to support a progressive cause or a progressive party? And the Conservatives have about 1/3 of that vote apart from that. The story of this election is that 2/3 have decided to back the Liberal Party. Almost the entire 2/3 of that progressive set of voters have decided to back the Liberal Party. I'm struck by how stagnant the NDP number is. There's been a little bit of movement with the BQ numbers, a little bit of movement with the Liberal number, but the NDP number does not seem to move. So Mr. Blanchet's offer is an interesting one, reminding me of Kathleen Wynne in 2018 when she said, we're going down.
Yeah.
We're going down. We know we're going down. So we're just, we're going to try and do what we can to be a decent opposition.
She also promised to quit, though.
That's
Mr. Blanchet is not doing that.
No, that's right. But it's not a dissimilar thing. We're not going to do as well as we hoped, is what Mr. Blanchet is saying. We have a victor, but help us out by keeping the victor honest. David Hurley has said that probably saved in Ontario 7 or 8 Liberal seats. I think if he could, Mr. Blanchet could save an additional 7 or 8 seats from what he has now, then that would be a respectable result. Although I would, again, ask a lot of questions. As somebody who's lived in the province of Quebec for some time, I would be asking pointed questions of Mr. Blanchet. How is it that he is about to lose, and lose decisively, if the polls are to be believed, to a near unilingual Anglophone who doesn't know Quebec all of that well and stumbled and bumbled through the campaign there? I think that's a legitimate question that he is going to have to answer. And I also think if the Liberals do go on and form a majority government, the other leaders are going to have to answer some very pointed questions as well. Should these results endure?
Well, the answer, Rob, is because it's the weirdest election ever. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, just the change and the shift, and Jono, like we have, as you know, Mark Carney, it is his resume, his experience, and his demeanor that transcends any language challenges and seems to be resonating. This is what you hear, you know, from all the Quebec journalists and pundits we have on the show. You know, Mr. Blanchet making this pitch, what is your sense as a Liberal, the effectiveness of what he did on Tullamarine last night in terms of making that as a closing argument here?
I think it was a smart approach. I think it's the right way to go. I just don't know if it's going to be effective. I'm just not convinced. And as we saw, there's been a little bit of movement in the polling, but it's still within the margin of error. So, you know, maybe we'll see it over the next few days. We also have a lot of voter turnout in the advanced polling where once you've banked that vote, you're not going to change your mind. I don't know that he has much choice. I think that is the best way to go. But I also expect, as this campaign goes on for 6 more days, that you'll see another sweep through Quebec, and especially in the Montreal area, that North Shore, South Shore, where I think the Liberals are looking for gains, and I think that there are opportunities there. And I think that's where you're going to have to see whether he can find one issue to poke at Carney. He has not found it yet, and that also means that the Liberals have to make sure not to have any mistakes. Yeah,
it's certainly, there's a lot of coin toss races on the north and south shore of Montreal there, and that could determine whether you get the 40 seats that makes you comfortable for a majority, or you're down in the 30s and you're white knuckling it into Manitoba.